Elijah Harlan dropped to his knees in the mud beside his father's body and didn't cry. He was 14 years old. The river had taken what the whiskey hadn't finished, and now Eli knelt there with rain hammering his back, holding the hand of a man who'd stopped being his father the night his mother's blood soaked through the bedroom floor. He stood up, wiped his hands on his trousers, walked back to the empty cabin alone. And he made himself a promise he'd keep for 13 years, until a woman named Josephine Callaway broke it wide open. If you're still listening, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. Now settle in, because this one's going to stay with you. Eli sold his father's cabin for $40 and a bay horse that pulled left. He rode west out of Missouri without looking back, because there was nothing behind him worth remembering. 13 years old, no family, no money, no plan except to never, ever end up like the man he'd just buried in a hole he'd dug himself because he couldn't afford a gravedigger. He worked cattle drives for 3 years, ate dust, slept on hard ground, took orders from men who hit harder than his father ever had. And he never once complained, because complaining meant you needed something. And needing something meant you could lose it. By 16, he'd saved enough to buy a saddle that didn't tear his legs raw. By 19, he'd learned enough about cattle to know more than most men twice his age. By 22, he'd put together enough cash and enough nerve to ride into Montana territory and lay claim to 1,800 acres of land that nobody wanted because the winters were brutal and the nearest town was a day's ride through country that would kill you if you stopped paying attention. But it had water. Blackstone Creek ran right through the middle of it, cold and clean, and Eli knew what his father never figured out. Water was the only thing in this world you could count on. It didn't lie. It didn't drink. It didn't stop flowing just because your heart was broken. 5 years later, Eli Harlan owned the biggest working ranch in the territory. 1,200 head of cattle, 8 hired hands, a house he'd built with his own 2 hands that had 4 walls, a solid roof, and not a single thing inside it that suggested a human being actually lived there. No pictures, no curtains, no softness anywhere. Otis Redmond had told him once, "Boss, I've slept in barns warmer than your parlor." "Then sleep in the barn," Eli had said. And Otis had laughed that deep, rumbling laugh of his, shook his head, and walked away knowing better than to push. Otis was the only man alive Eli trusted, and even that word felt too strong. Otis was useful. Otis was reliable. Otis had showed up 5 years ago looking for work, a freedman heading west with nothing but strong hands and a quiet dignity that made lesser men uncomfortable. Eli had hired him in 30 seconds and made him foreman in 6 months. Not because he liked him, but because Otis was the best cattleman he'd ever seen. The fact that Otis was also the closest thing Eli had to a friend, well, that was an accident he tried not to think about. It was Otis who walked up to the porch that Tuesday morning with his hat in his hands and trouble written all over his weathered face. "We got a problem, boss." Eli didn't look up from the bridle he was mending. "Which kind?" "The eating kind." Otis leaned against the porch rail. "Charlie's gone. Left yesterday. His daughter needs him in Omaha." Eli's hands went still. Charlie Reeves had been cooking for his crew for almost 2 years. Reliable, quiet, made decent food, and didn't cause trouble. "He say when he's coming back?" "He ain't coming back." Otis met Eli's eyes straight on. "And boss, the men are already talking. Rotation cooking lasted 3 days last time, before Johnson nearly poisoned half the crew with undercooked pork. We need a real cook, and we need one fast." "I'll figure it out." "You'll figure it out." Otis's voice went flat. "Like you figured it out last time?" When we lost 2 good hands because they got tired of eating charcoal and went to work for McKinnon's outfit instead. Eli's jaw tightened. He hated when Otis was right, which was most of the time. What do you suggest? Ride into Copper Hill.
Henry Callaway runs that boarding house on Main Street. His daughter does the cooking. Word is, she's the best in the territory. Maybe she knows someone looking for ranch work. Eli felt that familiar resistance rise in his chest. Hiring meant trusting. Trusting meant depending. Depending meant someone had power over you. And power meant pain. Every single time. But he looked out at his land, at the empire he'd bled for, and he knew Otis was right. Without a crew, 1,800 acres was just grass waiting to die. "Saddle my horse," Eli said. Copper Hill wasn't much of a town. A main street with a general store, a saloon that smelled like regret, a telegraph office, and Henry Callaway's boarding house sitting on the corner like it was trying to hold the whole block together. Eli tied his horse and walked inside, already planning to be gone in 10 minutes. The front hall smelled like fresh bread and something with cinnamon, and Eli hated how it made his chest ache with a memory he'd spent 20 years trying to kill. He followed the smell to the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. A woman stood at a massive iron stove, moving between 3 pots with a kind of efficiency that came from doing something so many times your body didn't need your brain's permission anymore. Brown-red hair pulled back tight, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands that moved fast and sure. She didn't turn around. "If you're here for a room, I'll be out in a minute. If you're here for trouble, I keep a shotgun behind the flour barrel." "Neither." Eli's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Looking for Henry Callaway." "My father's at the bank." She still didn't turn. "What do you need him for?" "I need a cook. Heard he might know someone." Now she turned, and Eli got his first full look at Josephine Callaway's face. Brown amber eyes that measured him the way a horse trader measured livestock. A jaw set like she'd already decided something about him and wasn't impressed. "How many men?" she asked. Eli blinked. "What?" "Your crew. How many mouths?" "8 hands, plus me." "Wage?" Eli named a figure. Fair, not generous. "Days off?" "Sunday afternoons." "Cookhouse or main house?" "Separate cookhouse, room attached." Josie wiped her hands on her apron, studied him for 3 more seconds, then said the words that knocked Eli Harlan completely sideways. "I'll take it." Eli stared at her. "I didn't offer it to you." "No, you came in here looking for someone who can feed 8 hungry cowboys 3 meals a day without burning the place down." Josie crossed her arms. "I've been doing exactly that for this boarding house since I was 16 years old. I'm 24, Mr. Harlan. I'm not a child, I'm not fragile, and I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you I'm the best cook in this territory, and you'd be a fool to walk out that door without hiring me." "You know my name," Eli said slowly. "Everyone knows your name. You're the rancher who built an empire out of nothing and scares off anyone who gets within 10 feet of him." Her chin lifted. "I don't scare easy." "This isn't a boarding house, Miss Callaway. It's a working ranch. 8 men. Hard country. No town for a day's ride." "I know what a ranch is." "Do you know what it's like being the only woman in a camp full of—" "Don't." Josie's voice went sharp as a blade. "Don't finish that sentence. I've handled drunk cowboys, handsy travelers, and men twice your size who thought a smile was an invitation. I'm still standing. I'm still cooking. And I'm still not interested in being told what I can handle
by a man who can't even hire a cook without looking like he's swallowing glass.
Silence hung between them. Eli felt something he hadn't felt in years. The unfamiliar sensation of being outmatched in a conversation. "Try the stew," Josie said. She ladled a bowl and held it out. Eli took it, tasted it, and something cracked. Just a hairline fracture, barely noticeable, somewhere deep in the fortress he'd spent 13 years building. Because the stew was perfect. Rich and savory, with meat that fell apart on his tongue and vegetables cooked just right. And it tasted like the kind of food that made you stop and remember that eating could be more than just survival. It tasted like his mother's cooking. Before the blood. Before the silence. Before everything ended. Eli set the bowl down. His hand wasn't quite steady. "When can you start?" "Monday. Dawn." Josie untied her apron. "I'll need to see your supplies and meet the crew. And Mr. Harlan, I have rules." "Rules?" "You hire me to cook. You let me cook. You've got complaints, you bring them to me directly. You don't undermine me in front of your men, and you don't let them do it either. I run that kitchen, not you, not your foreman, me. Clear?" Eli should have walked away. Every instinct screamed that this woman was dangerous. Not because she was weak, but because she wasn't. Because she looked at him with those amber eyes and didn't flinch, didn't defer, didn't do any of the things people usually did around him. She just stood there with flour on her hands and steel in her spine, and waited for him to catch up. "Clear," Eli heard himself say. "Good." Josie's expression softened by exactly 1 degree. "See you Monday, Mr. Harlan." Eli walked out of that kitchen and stood in the street for a full minute, trying to figure out what had just happened. He'd come to town for a name, a referral, maybe a retired trail cook looking for easy work. Instead, he'd hired a 24-year-old woman with a sharp tongue and eyes that saw too much. And he felt like he'd just stepped off a cliff without checking how far down the ground was. He rode home in silence, pushing his horse harder than necessary, trying to outrun the feeling settling in his gut. It didn't work. By the time he reached the ranch, the sun was going down, and the feeling had a name, though Eli refused to speak it. Fear. Not the kind that came from danger, the kind that came from knowing something was about to change, and you couldn't stop it. Otis was waiting on the porch. "Find someone?" "Yeah." "Who?" "Callaway's daughter." Otis's eyebrows rose. "Josie Callaway? The girl who threw a cast-iron skillet at Mick Brennan's head when he grabbed her in the saloon last year?" "That's the one." Otis was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, a real one, rare as rain in August. "Well, boss, this ought to be interesting." Eli didn't answer. He went inside his empty house, sat in his empty chair, and stared at his empty walls. Monday was 5 days away. In 5 days, Josephine Callaway would walk onto his property, with her sharp tongue and her steady hands, and her eyes that cut right through everything he'd built to protect himself. He should ride back tomorrow. Tell her he'd changed his mind. Find some old trail cook who wouldn't challenge him, wouldn't look at him like she could see every scar he'd hidden, wouldn't make him think about cinnamon and bread and a kitchen that smelled like someone cared. He should do that. He poured himself coffee, drank it cold, went to bed. He didn't ride back. Monday came cold and gray. Eli had spent Sunday cleaning the cookhouse himself, scrubbing grease stains and sweeping out years of neglect, which Otis found so amusing he had to leave twice to keep from laughing out loud. "Never seen you touch a broom before, boss." "Shut up, Ot." "Just saying. Must be some cook." "I said, shut up." But Otis was grinning as he walked away. and Eli threw the broom after him and missed on purpose. At dawn, a wagon appeared on the road. Josie drove it herself, sitting straight-backed on the seat, handling the reins like she'd been born to it. She had a trunk, 3 crates of supplies, and an expression that said she'd made her decision, and God help anyone who got in her way. Eli met her in the yard. His crew drifted over from the bunkhouse, curious, cautious, 8 weather-beaten men trying not to stare at the young woman climbing down from the wagon before anyone could offer to help. "Morning," Josie said briskly. "Where do I put my things?" "Cookhouse. Room in the back," Eli gestured. "Bed, dresser. It's not fancy, I know. I didn't come for fancy." Josie grabbed a crate and 3 of Eli's men immediately jumped to help. She thanked each one by name. She'd apparently asked around. And something twisted in Eli's gut that he refused to examine. Within an hour, she owned that cookhouse. Not legally. Something deeper than that. She walked through it with a notepad, cataloging supplies, asking questions about budgets and delivery schedules, reorganizing shelves with the speed that made Eli's head spin. She moved like a general taking command of a battlefield, and his men followed her lead without a single word of protest. Eli gathered them for introductions. Kept it short. "This is Josephine Callaway. She's our cook. You treat her with respect. You follow her rules in the kitchen. Questions?" Tommy Dawson, 19 and terrified of women, raised his hand like he was in school. "Ma'am, is it true you hit Mick Brennan with a skillet?" Josie looked at him. "It's true." "Did it hurt him?" "He didn't grab anyone else for 6 months." A pause. "I take that as a yes." The crew laughed. Even Eli's mouth twitched. Josie turned to him. "I'll have lunch ready by noon. After that, you and I need to talk about your supply situation, because based on what I just saw in that pantry, your men have been eating like prisoners, and I intend to fix that." She walked into her cookhouse and closed the door. 8 cowboys stood in the yard looking at each other. Otis rocked back on his heels. "Interesting," he said again, and this time Eli didn't argue. By noon, the smell coming from that cookhouse had every man on the ranch finding excuses to be nearby. When Josie rang the bell and they lined up at the serving window, the silence that fell over them was almost holy. Roast beef, gravy that tasted like it had been simmering for hours, mashed potatoes whipped smooth, biscuits that were golden brown and shattered when you bit into them, green beans with salt port, and coffee, real coffee, strong and hot, and brewed by someone who understood that coffee wasn't just a drink. It was the reason cowboys got out of bed. Tommy Dawson took one bite, and his eyes went wet. Old Russ Hargrove closed his eyes and didn't open them for a full 30 seconds. Hank Bishop, who complained about everything, ate 3 plates without saying a single word. Eli sat at the end of the table with his plate and watched his crew transform. These were hard men, sunburned, calloused, tough as saddle leather. And they were sitting there, eating Josie Callaway's food, with expressions that looked dangerously close to gratitude. He took a bite of his own meal. The beef melted. The gravy was perfect. The biscuits were better than his mother's, and that thought hit him like a punch to the chest, because nothing was supposed to be better than his mother's. Nothing was supposed to make him remember sitting in a warm kitchen with a woman who loved him before the world took her away. Eli put his fork down, pushed back from the table, stood. "Boss?" Otis looked up. "You all right?" "Fine. Got work." Eli walked away fast enough that nobody could see his face, and he stood in the barn for 10 minutes with his hands pressed flat against a stall door, breathing hard, trying to shove the memory back into the locked room where it belonged. He'd hired a cook. That was all. She'd feed his men and keep them happy and stay out of his way.
and he'd stay out of hers, and it would be strictly business. Professional. Controlled. He would not think about biscuits and cinnamon, and the way Josie Callaway's voice had gone just slightly soft when she'd handed Tommy Dawson an extra helping because the boy was too skinny. He would not think about that at all. But standing there in the barn, with the smell of fresh bread still drifting across the yard, Eli Harlan felt the first crack deepen in the wall he'd spent half his life building. And somewhere in the back of his mind, in a voice that sounded terrifyingly like his mother's, a whisper said, "You can't keep everyone out forever, Elijah."
Sooner or later, someone walks through. He told the voice to shut up. It didn't listen. 3 days. That's how long Eli's plan lasted. 3 days of avoiding the cookhouse, of eating fast and leaving faster, of sending Otis to relay messages that he could have delivered himself. 3 days of pretending Josie Callaway was invisible. On the 4th morning, she found him in the barn before dawn. "Mr. Harlan." Eli straightened from the horse he'd been brushing. Josie stood in the doorway, with her arms crossed and her jaw set in that way he was already learning meant someone was about to get an earful. "Miss Callaway, we need to talk." "About what?" "About you acting like a fool." Josie stepped closer. "You've been dodging me for 3 days, sending your foreman to tell me things you could say yourself. Even so fast you can't possibly taste anything. And you won't look at me for more than 2 seconds running." "I've been busy." "You've been hiding." Her voice was flat. Not angry. Worse. Certain. "Now, I don't care if you like me. That's not what I'm here for. But I care very much if you're making my job harder because you're uncomfortable having a woman on your property. So which is it? Am I doing something wrong, or are you just scared?" The word hit like a bullet. Scared. Nobody called Eli Harlan scared. Nobody dared. He'd built this ranch from nothing, fought off rustlers, survived winters that killed weaker men. He wasn't scared of anything. Except he was. He was scared of a woman with flour on her apron and truth in her mouth, and that was so pathetic he almost laughed. "You're not doing anything wrong," Eli said quietly. "Then stop running." Josie's eyes held his. "I'm not here to hurt you, Mr. Harlan. I'm here to feed your men. Let me do my job and talk to me like I'm a person instead of something you're afraid might bite." "I'm not afraid of you." "Then prove it." Josie tilted her head. "I need your schedule for the week so I can plan meals. I need to know about visitors. And I need to know what you won't eat, because I've been guessing, and I don't like guessing." Eli stared at this woman who'd walked onto his ranch 4 days ago and was already demanding he be a better version of himself. She wasn't intimidated. She wasn't impressed. She was just standing there, steady as bedrock, waiting for him to stop being a coward. "All right," Eli said. "You're right. I'll do better." Josie nodded. "Good. Now, schedule." They talked for 20 minutes. Professional. Direct. Josie asked smart questions and wrote neat notes and treated the whole conversation like it was the most normal thing in the world. And by the time she left, Eli felt like he'd just survived something that should have killed him. Otis appeared in the barn doorway 30 seconds later, leaning against the frame with a look of pure satisfaction. "Don't," Eli said. "Didn't say a word, boss." "You're thinking loud enough to hear in Copper Hill," Otis grinned. "I reckon that woman's the best thing that ever walked onto this ranch. She's just a cook, Ot." "Uh-huh." Otis pushed off the frame and ambled away. Just a cook. But they both knew that wasn't true. They both knew, even then, that Josie Callaway was something else entirely. Something Eli's fortress walls hadn't been built to withstand. Something
that was going to change everything. The first week bled into the second, and Eli kept his word. He stopped hiding, stopped sending Otis with messages he should deliver himself, stopped eating like a man trying to escape a burning building. He showed up to meals on time, answered Josie's questions about schedules and supplies, and treated her like what she was, an employee doing a job, nothing more, nothing less. That was the plan, anyway. The problem was that Josie Callaway didn't just cook. She rebuilt things. Quietly, without asking permission, without making a fuss about it. She scrubbed the cookhouse until the wood underneath the grease stains turned out to be a warm, honey color nobody had ever seen before. She organized the pantry so precisely that any man could find what he needed in the dark. She kept coffee hot at all hours, kept bread baking in rotation so the smell never quite left the air, kept a pot of something simmering on the back of the stove for anyone who came in cold or hungry or just needing a reason to sit down for a minute. And the men changed. Eli noticed it the way you notice a river shifting course. Not all at once, but in small movements that added up to something you couldn't ignore. Tommy Dawson started washing his face before meals. Russ Hargrove stopped cursing in the yard where Josie could hear. Hank Bishop, who hadn't written a letter in 3 years, asked Josie how to spell sincerely, and spent an entire Sunday evening composing something to his estranged brother in Kansas City. Even Otis was different. Not in obvious ways. Otis was already the most put-together man on the ranch. But Eli caught him humming one morning while he checked fence lines. And when Eli asked what he was so happy about, Otis just shrugged and said, "Biscuits were good today, boss." The cookhouse became the center of everything. Not just for meals, but for the in-between hours, the quiet moments after supper, when men who spent all day working alone suddenly wanted company. They'd gather around Josie's big prep table, playing cards, mending gear, telling stories they'd told 100 times, but somehow sounded different in that warm room, with that woman moving quietly around them, listening without judging, laughing at jokes that weren't that funny, treating each of them like they mattered. Eli watched it all from a distance. He told himself he was monitoring the situation, making sure his crew stayed focused, making sure Josie's presence wasn't causing problems. But the truth was simpler and more dangerous than that. He liked watching her. He liked the way she moved through the cookhouse, like she'd been born in it. The way she could carry on 3 conversations at once while kneading bread without breaking rhythm. The way her voice dropped low and warm when Tommy talked about missing his family, and went sharp and bright when Russ tried to sneak extra pie before supper. 2 weeks in, on a rainy Thursday evening, Eli made the mistake of walking into the cookhouse for coffee and not leaving. The crew was scattered, half in the bunkhouse, half still finishing fence repairs in the drizzle. Josie stood at the stove, stirring soup, her back to the door. She didn't turn when Eli came in, but she said, "Coffee's fresh. Cups are where they always are." Eli poured a cup and sat at the prep table. He had ledgers with him, accounts that needed reviewing, legitimate work that gave him a legitimate reason to be here, instead of alone in his empty house, listening to rain hit a roof that covered nobody but him. He opened the ledger, stared at numbers. "You're holding that page upside down," Josie said without looking. Eli turned the ledger right side up. "No, I wasn't." "Mr. Harlan, I can see your reflection in the pot. The page was upside down." Eli closed the ledger. Josie turned from the stove, wiping her hands, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the warm room while rain drummed on the roof. "You don't have to pretend," Josie said. "If you want somewhere warm to sit, just sit. You don't need the ledger as an excuse." "I don't need excuses to be in my own cookhouse." "No, you don't." Josie pulled a chair out and sat across from him. "So why do you keep bringing them?"
Eli didn't have an answer for that. Or rather, he had an answer he'd cut out his own tongue before speaking. So he sat there, with his coffee going cold and his walls going thin, and Josie sat across from him with her amber eyes and her flour-dusted apron. And the silence between them felt like something alive. "Can I ask you something?" Josie said. "You're going to anyway. Why don't you have anything in your house? No pictures, no curtains? Russ says it looks like nobody lives there." "Russ talks too much." "He does. But he's not wrong, is he?" Eli's jaw worked. "A house is for sleeping. Don't need decorations for that." "A house is for living. There's a difference." Josie's voice was quiet now, not pushing, not prying, just asking. "You've built this whole ranch, Mr. Harlan. 1,800 acres, 1,200 head of cattle, a crew that would follow you into a fire. But your house looks like you're planning to leave tomorrow. Like you never quite decided to stay." The words landed somewhere Eli didn't let people reach. He stood up, chair scraping. "I should check on the horses." "Eli?" She'd never used his first name before. It stopped him dead, one hand on the doorframe, rain blowing in cold against his face. "I'm sorry," Josie said behind him. "That was too much. I do that sometimes. Push when I should leave alone." Eli stood there. He could feel the rain. He could feel Josie's eyes on his back. He could feel 13 years of careful emptiness pressing against his ribs like something trying to get out. "My mother used to hang curtains," he said. The words came out before he could catch them, rough and low, like they'd been locked in a cellar and had forgotten what sunlight sounded like. "Yellow ones. She said a house without curtains was just a box, and people weren't meant to live in boxes." Josie was silent. "She died when I was 11, bringing a baby that died with her." Eli's hand tightened on the doorframe until the wood bit into his palm. "My father loved her so much that losing her turned him into something that wasn't alive anymore. Just a body going through motions, waiting for the rest of him to catch up with the parts that were already dead. Took him 3 years. Eli, I don't hang curtains because curtains mean you're staying, and staying means caring, and caring means losing, and losing means—" He stopped, swallowed. "I've said too much." "You haven't said enough." Josie's voice was closer now. She'd stood up, moved toward him, but she didn't touch him. She just stood there, close enough that he could feel her warmth against the cold rain blowing in. "But you don't have to say it all tonight." Eli turned his head just enough to see her face. Those amber eyes were bright, not with pity. He would have hated pity, but with something fiercer. Understanding, maybe. Recognition, like she knew exactly what it cost him to say those words, and she was holding the weight of them carefully. The way you'd hold something breakable that someone trusted you with. "Good night, Miss Callaway," Eli said. "Good night, Eli." He walked out into the rain and didn't look back. But he felt the crack in his walls widen by another inch, and he knew with a cold certainty that Josie Callaway had just walked through a door he'd spent half his life trying to keep shut. The next morning, Eli came to breakfast and Josie acted like nothing had happened. She served his food, asked about the day's schedule, reminded him that she needed a supply run to Copper Hill by Thursday. Professional. Normal. No weight, no expectation. No sign that he'd torn himself open in front of her the night before and bled all over her clean kitchen floor. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for him in 13 years. Otis noticed the shift because Otis noticed everything. He waited 3 days before saying anything, which, for Otis, showed remarkable restraint. They were riding the north fence line, checking posts after the rain, when Otis said, "You've been different this week." "Different how?" "Less like a rattlesnake someone poked with a stick. More like an actual human person."
That's a hell of a thing to say to your boss. I reckon you need to hear it. Otis reined his horse around a washout. Boss, I've worked for you 5 years. You're the fairest man I've ever known, and the loneliest. And I've watched that woman walk into your life like a match into a dark room. And I've watched you try to blow her out every single day. But she keeps lighting. She's just a cook, Ot. You keep saying that like it's going to become true if you say it enough times. Otis looked at him sideways. My wife died 12 years ago. Cholera took her in 3 days. Fastest 3 days of my life, and the longest. I got a daughter in Kansas I send money to every month, and I haven't seen her face in 4 years because I'm out here running your cattle instead. Eli was quiet. I ain't telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I know what it looks like when a man locks his heart in a box and throws away the key. I did it myself. Spent years thinking that was smart, thinking that was strong. But strong ain't the same as alive, boss. And you ain't been alive in a long time. Ot, I'm almost done. Otis pulled his horse to a stop and looked at Eli full on, his dark eyes steady. That woman in your cookhouse, she ain't trying to take anything from you. She's trying to give you something. And you're so busy being scared that you can't even see what it is. What is it? Eli's voice cracked on the question, and he hated himself for it. Otis smiled, slow and sad. A reason to hang curtains, boss. They rode the rest of the fence line in silence, but Otis's words sat in Eli's chest like a coal that wouldn't go out, burning steady and low, impossible to ignore. That Sunday, the crew rode into Copper Hill for their weekly evening off. Eli stayed behind. So did Josie. He found her behind the cookhouse, hanging laundry on a line she'd strung between 2 posts. Her hair was down. First time he'd seen it that way, falling past her shoulders in waves of brown and copper that caught the late afternoon light. She looked younger, softer, less like a general commanding a kitchen, and more like a woman who'd put down her armor for a few hours. Eli meant to walk past. His legs had other ideas. Need help? Josie glanced over her shoulder, surprised. You offering to hang laundry? I've got hands. They work. That they do. Josie handed him a wet sheet. Pin it at the corners. Don't let it drag. They worked in silence for a few minutes, side by side, the simple domestic rhythm of it settling over Eli like something he'd forgotten he knew. Pin, stretch, pin, the fabric snapping in the breeze. Josie's shoulder occasionally brushing his when she reached for the line. Can I ask you something? Eli said. Now who's pushing? Why'd you really leave the boarding house? The truth. Josie's hands stilled on the pillowcase. She was quiet long enough that Eli thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, There's a man in Copper Hill, Garrett Boone, runs the Silverstone Mining Company. The name hit Eli like a fist. Everyone in the territory knew Garrett Boone. Mining money, political connections, the kind of man who smiled at you while he was picking your pocket and made you thank him for it. He decided he wanted me, Josie said. Her voice had gone flat. Careful. Not in a courting way, in an owning way. He started coming to the boarding house. Started talking to my father about arrangements. My father's got the boarding house and a corner property that Boone wants for some expansion project. Boone made it real clear that things would go smooth for my father's business if I cooperated, and real rough if I didn't. Eli felt something cold and murderous settle into his bones. He touch you? No, he's smarter than that. He never does anything that leaves a mark or a witness. He just applies pressure. Finds code violations that didn't exist last month. Raises insurance costs. Makes suppliers think twice about doing business with us. Death by 1,000 cuts, and all of it deniable. Josie pinned the pillowcase with hands that had gone white-knuckled. My father's scared. Scared enough that he actually asked me to consider it. Not because he's a bad man. He's not. He's just tired and frightened, and he doesn't know how to fight someone like Garrett Boone. So you ran. I chose to leave. Josie turned to face him.
There's a difference. Running is what you do when you're beaten. I'm not beaten, Eli. I'm just regrouping, figuring out my next move. And when you walked into that kitchen looking for a cook, it felt like the universe was handing me a door. So I walked through it. Does Boone know where you are? Probably. Copper Hill's too small for secrets. But out here, I'm beyond his daily reach. He can't corner me. Can't pressure my father with me standing right there being stubborn. She paused. I should have told you this when you hired me. You had a right to know what you were bringing onto your property. Eli looked at this woman, who'd carried all of that. The fear, the pressure, the impossible choice between her own freedom and her father's safety, and still showed up to his cookhouse every morning at dawn and fed his men like they were kings, and never once let any of it show. Josie, if you want me to leave, I understand. I brought trouble to your door, and that's not... Josie. Eli's voice was quiet, but it stopped her cold. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm telling you that if Garrett Boone sets one foot on my property, he'll regret it for the rest of his natural life. Josie stared at him. Eli, you don't know what he's capable of. I don't care what he's capable of. He's got money, lawyers, connections to every official in the territory. He doesn't fight fair. Neither do I when someone threatens my people. The word hung between them. My people. Eli heard it and felt his chest tighten because he'd said it without thinking, and it was true in a way that terrified him. Josie was his people now. Somewhere between the biscuits in the barn and the night she'd let him bleed without trying to fix him, she'd become his. Josie's eyes went bright. She blinked hard, twice. You barely know me. I know enough. You know I make good stew. I know you're the bravest person I've ever met. The words came out raw, unplanned. Eli felt exposed, like he'd just handed her a loaded gun and pointed it at his own chest. I know you left everything to keep your dignity. I know you walked onto a stranger's ranch and made it better in 2 weeks than I managed in 5 years. I know my crew would ride through hellfire for you, and they've known you less than a month. And I know... He stopped. Josie waited. I know I'm better when you're here, Eli said. And that scares me more than Garrett Boone ever could. Josie reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, rough with work, strong. She held on and didn't let go. Then we'll be scared together, she said. That's better than being scared alone. Eli looked down at their joined hands. His, scarred, sun-darkened, built for fence posts and saddle leather. Hers, calloused, capable, built for bread dough and cast iron. 2 hands that had each done hard things alone for too long. He didn't pull away. They stood there in the late afternoon light, laundry snapping on the line above them. And something settled between them that felt like the opposite of everything Eli had ever known. Not emptiness, but fullness. Not fear, but the beginning of something braver than fear. Don't tell Otis about this, Eli said. Josie laughed. It was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. Eli Harlan. That man knew before we did. She was right. Of course she was right. Otis was sitting on the bunkhouse steps when they walked back, separately, with a careful distance between them that fooled absolutely nobody. He took one look at Eli's face and just nodded, slow and satisfied,
like a man watching a horse finally drink after leading it to water 100 times. That night, Eli stood on his porch and looked at the cookhouse window where Josie's lamp was burning. She was in there reading, probably, or making notes for tomorrow's meals, or just sitting in the warmth of a space she'd made her own.
Eli looked at that light and felt something shift in his chest. Not a crack this time. Something bigger. Something that felt like a wall coming down in slow motion, brick by brick. And behind it, all the things he'd locked away for 13 years. Longing and hope. And the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to spend the rest of his life alone in a house without curtains. He went inside. He sat in his chair. He looked at his bare walls. And for the first time since he was 14 years old, Eli Harlan thought about what it might be like to stay. 3 weeks passed before Garrett Boone came for them. 3 weeks of mornings that smelled like coffee and biscuits, of evenings where Eli found himself in the cookhouse more often than his own house, of small moments that kept stacking up like stones in a wall he was building instead of tearing down. 3 weeks where Eli Harlan almost let himself believe that a man could change his whole life just by deciding to stop being afraid. Then the buggy rolled up the road on a Tuesday afternoon, and everything shattered. Eli was in the barn, shoeing a mare, when he heard wheels on dry ground. He straightened, hammer still in hand, and walked to the barn door. A polished black buggy sat in his yard, the kind that cost more than most cowboys earned in 5 years. A tall, thin man in a city suit was climbing down, leather case in hand, shoes shining like they'd never touched real dirt. "Wade Keller?" the man called, then caught himself. "Forgive me, Elijah Harlan?" "Who's asking?" "Theodore Voss, attorney representing Silverstone Mining Corporation." The man extended a hand that Eli didn't take. "I wonder if we might discuss a business matter, privately." Eli felt ice form at the base of his spine. Silverstone Mining. Garrett Boone's outfit. The company that had been swallowing territory of land for the past 5 years, the way a snake swallows eggs, whole and without apology. "Say what you came to say." Voss glanced at the crew members who'd stopped working to watch. Perhaps inside would be more appropriate. Eli considered telling him to get off his land. But knowing was better than guessing, so he led Voss to the ranch house, with Otis following uninvited, which suited Eli fine. Voss settled into the office chair like he owned it, opened his case, laid papers on the desk with the careful precision of a man who'd done this exact thing to 100 other people and always won. "Mr. Harlan, I'll be direct. Silverstone Mining is expanding operations in this region. Your water rights to Blackstone Creek are essential to our plans. We're prepared to make a generous offer. The creek's not for sale. I encourage you to review the figures before—" "I said it's not for sale." Eli didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "Those water rights keep 1,200 head of cattle alive. Without them, I've got 1,800 acres of dead grass. You might as well ask me to sell my lungs." Voss didn't blink. "Mr. Harlan, Silverstone is committed to this expansion. I'd strongly suggest you accept while the offer remains generous. Our geological surveys indicate that Blackstone Creek may have shifted course due to natural erosion. If so, your claim could be challenged in court. We have resources for extended litigation. Do you?" The threat sat in the room like a rattlesnake on a dinner plate. Otis's hand moved toward the rifle on the wall, but Eli shook his head. "Get off my property, Mr. Voss." 1 week, Mr. Harlan." Voss gathered his papers with that same careful precision. "After that, Silverstone proceeds through other channels." He left.
Eli and Otis stood in the silence he'd left behind. And Eli felt the ice in his spine spread to his chest, his hands, his gut.
"They can't really challenge your rights," Otis said. "You've got the deed, the survey, everything legal."
"With enough money, they can challenge anything."
Eli picked up the offer paper and crushed it without reading the number.
"Question is whether they'll win."
"What are you going to do?"
Before Eli could answer, Josie's scream cut through the afternoon air like a blade through cloth. Eli ran. He'd never moved that fast in his life. Not when the river took his father, not when rustlers hit the south pasture, not when lightning struck 50 feet from where he stood during the worst storm of his life. He ran because Josie was screaming, and every cell in his body understood only one thing: get to her. He burst through the cookhouse door and stopped dead. Josie stood pressed against the far wall, face drained white, hands fisted in her apron.
And standing in the middle of her kitchen, looking around with the expression of a man inspecting property he intended to purchase, was Garrett Boone. Eli had never seen him before, but knew him instantly. 42 years old, dark hair silvering at the temples, expensive clothes, and eyes that calculated the value of everything they touched, including people. When he turned to look at Eli, his smile was the kind that made you want to check if your wallet was still in your pocket. "You must be Harlan." Boone's voice was smooth as oiled leather. "Garrett Boone, Silverstone Mining. I thought I'd see the operation personally after sending Voss ahead." Eli's eyes went to Josie. Her face, her fear. The way her whole body was pressed against that wall, like she was trying to disappear through it. Something inside him went very quiet and very cold. "You're not welcome here," Eli said. "I'm here on legitimate business." Boone's smile widened. "Though I admit I was surprised to discover my dear Josie had taken employment at the very ranch we're negotiating with. Remarkable coincidence. Get out." In a moment, Boone shifted, trying to see past Eli to Josie. "Josie, dear, have you told Mr. Harlan about our understanding? About the arrangement your father and I have been discussing?" Josie's voice came out shaky but hard as iron underneath. "There is no arrangement. I told you no. I'll keep telling you no until one of us is dead. Your father thinks differently." Boone's tone went silky, poisonous. "Especially after our recent discussions about those fire code violations at his boarding house. Such unfortunate timing, all those problems appearing just when his insurance comes up for renewal." "You're threatening her family," Eli said. It wasn't a question. "Threatening? No, Mr. Harlan. Conducting business. Henry Callaway owns several properties in Copper Hill, including that corner lot we need for expansion. He's been reluctant to sell, but I've made him a very fair offer. The property in exchange for clear titles and my personal assurance that his daughter will be well provided for. 2 birds, 1 stone. You're trying to buy her like livestock." "I'm securing her future." Boone's charm dropped for half a second, showing something underneath that was hard and ugly and used to getting what it wanted. "Everyone wins in my arrangement, Mr. Harlan. I suggest you stay out of it." Josie stepped around Eli. He tried to stop her, but she moved fast, her fear burning off like morning fog, replaced by a fury that made her voice shake. "My father is scared because you made him scared. With your threats and your pressure and your convenient code violations that appear from nowhere. But I am not scared of you, Garrett. I left town to get away from you, and I am not coming back." "Working in a cookhouse," Boone laughed. It was the ugliest sound Eli had ever heard. "Playing frontier wife for a dirt rancher. Josie, be reasonable. This Independence Act is charming, but it's not sustainable. You're a young woman, alone." "She's not alone." Eli moved forward 1 step, just one,
But something in how he moved made Boone take a step back, and the room got very still. She's got me. She's got my crew. And she's got the right to tell you no as many times as she wants. No, I'm going to say this once, Boone. Get off my land. Don't come back. And if I hear you've touched her, or her father, or anything that belongs to them, you'll find out what happens when you push a man past what he can tolerate. Boone studied Eli the way a man studies a locked door, looking for weaknesses. You've attached yourself to the rancher, he said to Josie. How predictable. Then back to Eli. Let me make something clear. Silverstone wants your water rights. We will get them. Josie, will reconsider her position. And you, Mr.
Harlan, will learn that fighting me is the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. I've made expensive mistakes before. I'm still here. Not for long. Boone moved toward the door, his hired men flanking him. 1 week. Accept the offer on Blackstone Creek. Josie comes home to her father. Everyone walks away intact. Or, he paused, letting the silence do his work for him. Don't, and watch what happens to everything you care about. He left. His buggy wheels crunched across the yard, faded down the road, and disappeared. Josie was shaking. The fury had burned out and left her trembling, her composure crumbling like a dam with too many cracks. Eli pulled her into his arms, and she came without resistance, burying her face against his chest, her fingers gripping the front of his shirt like he was the only solid thing in a world that was falling apart. I'm sorry, she whispered. I brought this to your door. I never meant— Stop. Eli held her tighter. This isn't your fault. None of it. He'll destroy you. He's got money and lawyers, and he'll take the creek and the land and— Let him try. Eli, you don't understand. He always wins. Always. Every person who's ever stood against him has lost everything. He's patient and he's vicious and he doesn't stop. Neither do I. Josie pulled back enough to look at his face. Her eyes were red, wet, terrified. But underneath the terror, Eli saw something else. Trust. She was scared to death, but she was looking at him like she believed he might actually be able to do something about it. That look hit him harder than anything Boone had said, because it meant Josie was counting on him, leaning on him, trusting him with something precious. And Eli Harlan, who'd spent 13 years making sure nobody ever depended on him, found that he'd rather die than let her down. We need a plan, Eli said. Otis! His foreman stepped forward from where he'd been standing by the door, quiet and watchful. Boss? Ride to Copper Hill. Find Henry Callaway. I need to know exactly what Boone has threatened versus what he's implied. Get the real picture. Done. Otis didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions, just moved. Eli, Josie gripped his hand. You can't fight Silverstone Mining. They'll crush you. Maybe, but I'm not lying down without a fight. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbing the tears off her cheeks. 2 weeks ago, you told me to stop being scared. You told me to be brave enough to try. Well, this is me trying. Boone doesn't get to win just because he's got more money. There's got to be a way. What way? He's got lawyers, judges, half the territory in his pocket. I don't know yet, but I'll find it. Eli pressed his forehead to hers. Together. You said that. Scared together is better than scared alone. Josie closed her eyes. I said that. Did you mean it? Yes. Then trust me. She breathed in, breathed out, opened her eyes. I trust you. Eli kissed her forehead. Then he turned to his crew, who'd gathered outside the cookhouse, every one of them tight-jawed and angry. 8 men who'd heard everything. 8 men who'd eaten Josie's food and laughed at her jokes and been treated like family by a woman who didn't owe them a thing. "Men," Eli said, "you heard that. Silverstone Mining wants Blackstone Creek. Garrett Boone wants Josie. They think we'll fold because they're bigger and richer and meaner. I intend to prove them wrong. But I can't force you to stay for this. If you want your wages and a clean exit, no hard feelings." Tommy Dawson stepped forward first. 19 years old, skinny, scared of women and thunderstorms and his own shadow. He stepped forward and said, "Boss, Miss Josie taught me how to write my sister a letter last week. First letter I ever wrote in my whole life. Nobody messes with her. I'm staying." Russ Hargrove spat tobacco in the dirt. "Same." Hank Bishop cracked his knuckles. "What he said." One by one, all 8, every last man. Josie's hand found Eli's and squeezed so hard his knuckles popped. He didn't mind. Otis returned from Copper Hill after nightfall, with Henry Callaway riding double behind him, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in a single day. Henry was thin and gray, and when he saw Josie, he grabbed her and held on like she was the last thing keeping him upright. "Papa," Josie's voice cracked, "tell us everything." They sat in the cookhouse, Eli, Josie, Henry, Otis, with coffee going cold and lamplight throwing shadows on the walls. Henry laid it out with the exhausted honesty of a man who'd been carrying too much for too long. "Everything. He's threatened everything." Henry's hand shook around his cup. The boarding house, the corner property, the building lease, inspectors finding violations I've never heard of, insurance companies refusing to renew, suppliers raising prices overnight. All of it deniable. All of it time to make me cooperate. "Cooperate how?" Eli said, though he already knew. "He wants the corner lot for his expansion, and he wants—" Henry's voice broke. He looked at Josie. "He wants you. Says if I arrange a courtship, give my blessing, he'll pay top dollar for the property and make all the problems disappear." "That's extortion," Otis said flatly. "That's Garrett Boone." Henry laughed, bitter as bad coffee. "He frames everything so careful, never quite says anything provable, just helpful suggestions about how much easier life could be if we all cooperated." Eli looked at Josie. She was staring at her father with something that broke Eli's heart. Love and frustration and grief, all tangled together. She loved this tired, frightened man, and she was furious at the world for putting him in a position where his fear could be used as a weapon against her. "There are others," Henry said quietly. "Other people Boone has done this to. Bill Crawford's freight company. Mysterious accidents until he sold." Martha Henderson's hotel burned to the ground 3 months after she refused to sell. Sam Fitch's cattle operation collapsed when his water rights got challenged in court by a judge everybody knows is on Silverstone's payroll. "How many?" Eli asked. "That I know of? A dozen, maybe more. 12 people. 12 businesses. 12 lives dismantled by one man who operated in shadows and never left fingerprints." Eli felt something harden in his chest that went beyond anger. This was war, and he'd just been drafted, whether he wanted it or not. "We need those names," Eli said. "Every person Boone has hurt. Dates, details, what happened and when." "For what?" Henry asked wearily. "Who's going to listen? The courts are compromised. Territorial officials are on his payroll. We're just people who got hurt by a bully," Eli cut in. "But 12 people telling the same story isn't a complaint. It's a pattern. And patterns are hard to ignore when you shine enough light on them."
"Light from where?"
Eli's mind was working now. Fast. Hard. The way it worked when he was tracking cattle through bad terrain.
finding angles other people missed. Boone operates in the dark. That's where he's powerful. But powerful men have investors, partners, people who need to trust them. If we drag his tactics into daylight, newspapers, public attention, somewhere he can't control the story, the territorial papers won't touch it, Henry said. Silverstone advertises too heavy. Then we go bigger. Denver papers, Eastern papers, reporters who don't owe Boone anything and might love a story about a mining company destroying frontier families. Eli looked at Otis. You still got that friend in Denver? The one at the newspaper? Otis nodded slowly. Marcus Pope, reporter for the Rocky Mountain News. Good man. Honest. He's been writing about mining operations for years. If anyone would listen, it's him. Can you get word to him? Telegraph from Copper Hill.
Have an answer by morning. Do it. Eli turned to Josie. Can you write? Put together everything Boone's done. Every threat, every incident, everything you've witnessed firsthand.
Yes.
Josie's fear hadn't left her face, but the determination was winning the fight.
Every word.
Henry, I need you to make a list. Every person Boone has targeted. Names, dates, what happened. Everything you know and everything you've heard. Henry looked at his daughter, then at Eli. You really think this can work? Going against Silverstone Mining with newspaper stories? I think Garrett Boone has never had someone fight back, Eli said. He's never had someone refuse to stay quiet. He's counting on fear to keep everyone in line, because fear has always worked before. Well, it's not going to work this time.
What about the water rights? Josie asked. Voss said they're challenging your claim. Said the creek shifted course.
That was the other blade hanging over their heads. Eli hadn't told anyone yet what he was planning to do about it. I'm riding out tonight. Going to check the creek myself. See if Voss was bluffing or if the course really has moved. It's dark, Eli. I know this land better in the dark than most men know their own front porch. I'll be back by morning. Josie held his gaze for a long moment. He could see every fear she carried written in those amber eyes. Fear for her father, fear for herself, fear for this man she'd somehow let herself care about, even though caring was the most dangerous thing either of them had ever done. Come back, she said simply. I will. Eli rode north under a sky packed with stars, following Blackstone Creek by moonlight and memory. He checked the banks against the survey map in his head, the one he'd memorized when he bought this land, because memorizing meant controlling, and controlling meant keeping. For the first mile, everything matched. The creek ran where it should, within his boundaries, legally his. But as he pushed east toward the source, the story changed. An old cottonwood that should have been on the north bank was on the south. Rock formations he remembered being creekside were now 10 feet from water. The channel had shifted, probably in the spring floods 2 years back, carving new paths through soil that didn't care about property lines or legal surveys. Eli's gut clenched. Voss hadn't been bluffing. The creek had moved enough that his original survey didn't match the current flow. Boone had grounds for a challenge. Maybe not a winning one, but enough to drag Eli through court for years, bleeding money he didn't have while Silverstone waited him out. But as he traced the new course by lantern light, something caught his eye. The creek didn't just shift off his property. It meandered, looped, crossed onto neighboring land, and came back. The shift cut both ways, complicated water access for multiple properties, not just his. Which meant, if Boone wanted clean water rights for his mining operation, he'd be stepping into a legal mess that could take a decade to sort out. It wasn't a victory, but it was a weapon.
a way to make Boone's easy win into an expensive, tangled disaster. And expensive disasters were the only language men like Boone really understood. Eli rode home with mud on his boots and a plan taking shape in his head. Dangerous, desperate, the kind of plan that either saves everything or burns it all down. When he walked into the cookhouse at dawn, Josie was already there. Coffee made, bread rising, notes spread across the prep table in her neat handwriting. Pages and pages of everything Garrett Boone had done. Every threat, every manipulation, every carefully deniable act of destruction. She looked up when Eli came in, read his face. "The creek shifted."
"Yeah, how bad?" "Bad enough that Boone's got a case, but complicated enough that I've got ammunition too." Eli poured coffee and sat across from her. "The shift goes both ways. Multiple properties affected. If Boone wants to litigate my claim, he opens a legal war that'll cost him more than this ranch is worth. Mutually assured destruction. Something like that." "That's not enough," Josie said quietly. "Boone doesn't back down from expensive fights. He makes examples." "I know." Eli reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers laced through his automatically, like they'd been doing it for years instead of days. "That's why we're not just playing defense. We're going to hit him so hard, he can't hit back." Josie squeezed his hand. "Tell me the plan." Before Eli could answer, Otis pushed through the door with a telegram in his fist and a grin on his face that Eli had never seen before in 5 years of working together. "Marcus Pope," Otis said. "He's coming. Leaving Denver today. Says he's been building a file on Silverstone for 2 years, and he's been waiting for someone brave enough to go on record." Otis slapped the telegram on the table. His exact words: "Tell your boss I'll be there in 3 days. Tell him to have everything ready. And tell him this is going to be the biggest story this territory has ever seen." Eli looked at Josie. Josie looked at Eli. And somewhere between the fear and the hope, and the desperate knowledge that they were about to pick a fight with the most powerful man in Montana territory, something passed between them that didn't need words. They were going to war. Together. And God help Garrett Boone, because Elijah Harlan had finally found something worth fighting for that wasn't just land or water or survival. It was the woman sitting across from him, with fire in her eyes, and his hand in hers. And he would burn the whole territory to the ground before he let anyone take her away. Marcus Pope arrived on the 3rd day, just like he'd promised. He rode in on a rented horse that looked about as comfortable with the frontier as Pope himself. A lean, sharp-eyed man in his 30s, with ink-stained fingers and the kind of restless energy that came from chasing stories the way other men chased gold. He dismounted in Eli's yard, looked around at the ranch, the crew, the cookhouse where Josie stood in the doorway watching him, and said, "Which one of you is Harlan?" "That'd be me," Eli stepped forward. Pope shook his hand hard enough to mean it. "I've been waiting 2 years for someone to go on record against Silverstone. 2 years of collecting scraps and rumors and dead ends because everyone's too scared to talk. Your foreman's telegram was the first real break I've had." He looked at Otis. "Mr. Redmond, good to see you again. Wish it were better circumstances, Marcus." "Better circumstances don't make good stories." Pope pulled a leather satchel from his saddlebag, thick with papers. "I've got files on Silverstone going back 5 years. Suspicious accidents, property seizures, court rulings that don't add up. What I don't have is people willing to say it out loud with their names attached. That's what I need from you." Eli led him inside the cookhouse, where Josie and Henry were waiting with their own stack of documents. Josie's meticulous notes, Henry's list of victims, copies of threatening letters, and suspicious inspection reports that Henry had been quietly collecting for months without knowing what to do with them.
Pope spread everything on the prep table and went through it with the focus of a man reading a map to buried treasure. He asked questions, sharp, specific, the kind that cuts straight to the bone of things. When did Boone first approach you? What exact words did he use? Who else was present? Do you have dates? Do you have witnesses? Josie answered everything without flinching.
Clear, detailed, steady. Eli watched her lay out the worst experience of her life for a stranger's notebook and felt something swell in his chest that was equal parts pride and heartbreak. She shouldn't have to do this. No woman should have to catalog the ways a powerful man had tried to own her just so a newspaper might care enough to print it. But Josie didn't want his pity. She wanted justice. So Eli kept his mouth shut and let her talk. Henry was harder. His hands shook when he described the escalating pressure, the inspectors who appeared without warning, the insurance problems, the suppliers who suddenly couldn't fill his orders. His voice cracked twice, and both times Josie reached over and held his hand until he could continue. He was ashamed. Eli could see it in the way Henry couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Ashamed that he'd been scared. Ashamed that he'd almost given in. Ashamed that his daughter had to flee her own home because he wasn't strong enough to protect her. "Mr. Callaway," Pope said when Henry finished, "what you've told me takes courage. I want you to know that." Henry shook his head. Courage would have been saying no to Boone 2 years ago and meaning it. "You're saying it now. That counts." Pope spent 3 days at the ranch. He interviewed every crew member who'd witnessed Boone's visit. He rode to Copper Hill and tracked down 4 of the names on Henry's list, people who'd lost businesses or property to Silverstone's expansion. 2 refused to talk. 2 others had been waiting for exactly this. Bill Crawford, the freight operator whose company had been destroyed by a series of mysterious accidents, sat in Henry's back parlor and talked for 3 hours straight. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with the kind of anger that comes from being robbed and watching the thief walk free. He had records, dates, repair bills for equipment that had been sabotaged so carefully it looked like wear and tear unless you knew what to look for. He'd kept everything, hoping someday it would matter. "I knew it was Boone," Crawford said. "Everybody knew. But knowing and proving are different things when the man doing it owns half the territory." Martha Henderson was harder to find. She'd moved to a small cabin outside town after her hotel burned, living on savings that were running out fast. When Pope told her what they were doing, she started crying. Not from sadness, from relief. From the sheer, overwhelming relief of someone finally asking what had happened to her and actually believing the answer. "The fire investigator said faulty wiring," Martha told Pope, her jaw tight. "I'd had the whole building inspected 8 months before. New wiring throughout. Cost me everything I had in savings, but somehow, miraculously, the wiring failed. And somehow, miraculously, all my insurance documentation had errors that voided my claim. And somehow, miraculously, Boone's company made an offer on the property 3 weeks later." Pope wrote it all down. Every word, every detail, every piece of a pattern so clear and consistent that dismissing it as coincidence would require either blindness or corruption. On the 3rd evening, Pope sat at the cookhouse table with Eli and Josie, his notes spread around him like fallen leaves, and said, "I've got enough." "Enough for what?" Eli asked. "Enough for front page, multiple articles, the full treatment." Pope leaned back. "The pattern is undeniable. 12 documented incidents over 5 years, all involving Silverstone, all following the same playbook: approach, pressure, mysterious problems, capitulation, or destruction. Boone's name runs through every single one. Combined with your testimony, Crawford's records, Henderson's inspection documents, and the water rights challenge against you,
It's the most complete picture of corporate intimidation I've ever assembled. Will your editor run it? Josie asked. My editor has been trying to nail Silverstone for 3 years. He'll run it tomorrow if I can get to a telegraph office tonight. Copper Hill Telegraph closes at sundown, Otis said from the doorway. Then I ride to Copper Hill tonight. Pope was already gathering his papers. Mr. Harlan, Miss Callaway, I want you to understand what happens when this publishes. Boone will retaliate. He'll deny everything. He'll call you liars, attention seekers, disgruntled competitors. He'll use every tool he has to discredit you. We know, Eli said. But he'll be doing it in daylight, Pope continued, in front of investors, business partners, territorial officials who can't afford to look the other way when a major newspaper is asking questions. That's your advantage. Not that you're stronger than Boone. You're not. But once this story breaks, everything he does to you becomes evidence. Every threat, every retaliation, every suspicious accident points right back at him. You become too visible to destroy quietly. Insurance through attention, Josie said. Pope pointed at her. Exactly. The best protection you got isn't guns or lawyers. It's eyes. The more people watching, the harder it is for Boone to operate. He rode out that night for Copper Hill with his satchel full of dynamite, disguised as paper and ink. Eli watched him go from the porch, Josie beside him, her shoulder touching his in the dark. Are we doing the right thing? Josie asked quietly. We're doing the only thing. That's not the same as right. No, Eli admitted, but it's the same as necessary. 4 days later, on the morning Eli's water rights hearing was scheduled in Cheyenne, a hearing Boone had filed to strip him of everything. The Rocky Mountain News ran a front-page story under the headline that Eli would remember for the rest of his life. Mining company faces allegations of systematic intimidation across Montana territory. Pope had done exactly what he promised. Laid out the pattern with surgical precision. Named Boone directly. Quoted victims. Documented the suspicious timing of accidents and legal challenges that always seemed to benefit Silverstone. Raised hard questions about territorial officials who'd failed to investigate, despite evidence that a child could follow. Eli read it in the cookhouse, with Josie, Henry, and Otis crowded around him. Nobody spoke for a full minute. He's done, Henry whispered. He has to be done. He's not done yet, Eli said, because he knew Garrett Boone, knew the type. Men who'd built their power on fear didn't collapse from a single blow. They hit back, hard, fast, with everything they had. The counterstrike came that afternoon. A rider from town with a letter in Boone's handwriting. Eli read it out loud because secrets had no place in this fight anymore. Mr. Harlan, you have made a grave miscalculation. I offered civilized resolution. You responded with slander. Very well. Your ranch will be condemned. Your crew scattered. Your name destroyed. Miss Callaway's father will face criminal charges that will see him imprisoned. His properties will suffer unfortunate accidents. You have 24 hours to retract your statements. Otherwise, prepare to lose everything. G. Boone. Silence. Then Josie said, He put it in writing. Eli looked at her. Josie's face had gone pale, reading the threats against her father. But her eyes were sharp and bright and focused on something Eli hadn't seen yet. He put his threats in writing, Josie repeated. Arson, false charges, property destruction. He handed us evidence. He'll deny writing it. Maybe. But combined with everything else, combined with Pope's story, this is exactly what we've been saying he does. Documented. In his own hand. Josie grabbed the letter. We send this to Pope, today, right now. Let him publish Boone's threats alongside everything else.
Make it so the whole territory sees what happens when someone stands up to Garrett Boone. He'll retaliate harder, Henry said, his face gray. He's already retaliating as hard as he can, Papa. Josie's voice was gentle, but unbreakable. The only difference is, now people are watching. Every bad thing that happens to us from this point forward points directly at him. That's our protection. Eli looked at this woman, this 24-year-old cook's daughter, who'd figured out in 30 seconds what Boone's lawyers hadn't anticipated in 5 years. She wasn't just brave, she was brilliant. And Boone had made the mistake every bully makes eventually. He'd assumed his victim was too stupid to fight back. They telegraphed Pope. Pope wired back within the hour. Send letter immediately. Running follow-up tomorrow. Front page. This is the story of the year. The second article hit the territory like a thunderclap. Mining superintendent threatens retaliation against whistleblowers. Pope had laid it out with devastating clarity. Boone's letter, alongside the pattern of abuse, the victims' testimonies, the suspicious timing of every disaster that had ever befallen anyone who'd stood in Silverstone's way. By noon, territorial investigators showed up at the ranch asking for interviews. By evening, 3 Eastern newspapers had sent telegrams requesting more information. And by the following morning, a different lawyer arrived. Not Theodore Voss this time, but someone older, more polished, more expensive. The kind of lawyer corporations send when they're trying to make a problem disappear. Thomas Everett, the man said, shaking Eli's hand with practiced warmth. Representing Silverstone Mining Corporation. I'm here to discuss resolution. They met in the cookhouse. Eli, Josie, Henry on one side, Everett on the other. Pope sat in the corner taking notes, and Everett's jaw tightened when he saw the reporter, but he didn't object. Silverstone is prepared to withdraw its challenge to your water rights, Everett said. Binding agreement, 10 years. Additionally, a settlement of $5,000 for any inconvenience. Mr. Callaway's properties will be deemed in full compliance. No further action. $5,000. Eli felt the number land in the room like a physical weight. That was 2 years of ranch earnings, security, expansion money, a future with cushions built in. All he had to do was sign a paper saying he'd been wrong about everything. In exchange, Everett continued, you and Miss Callaway sign affidavits retracting your statements to the press. Acknowledge that the allegations were based on misunderstandings. Eli looked at Josie. She was staring at Everett with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. Not anger, not fear, but something colder. Contempt. The quiet contempt of someone who's been offered a bribe to forget that they were hurt. What about Bill Crawford? Josie asked. Everett blinked. I'm sorry? Bill Crawford, the freight operator whose business was destroyed. Does he get $5,000 too? And Martha Henderson, whose hotel burned down? And Sam Fitch, whose water rights were stolen in a rigged courtroom. Do they get settlements? Do they get their lives back? Miss Callaway, I'm here to discuss your situation specifically. Our situation is their situation. Josie's voice cut like a freshly stropped razor. We're not special. We're just the ones who happen to fight back. There are 12 people on that list who lost everything because Garrett Boone wanted what they had. If we sign your papers, we're telling every one of them that their suffering doesn't matter, as long as we got paid. Everett turned to Eli. Mr. Harlan, I strongly advise— No, Eli said. Excuse me? No, we don't retract. We don't sign. We don't take your money. Eli stood. You can tell Boone, or whoever's actually pulling strings now that Boone's become a liability, that silence isn't for sale. Not ours.
Not at any price. Everett's professional mask cracked just enough to show real frustration. You have no idea what you're refusing. Silverstone has resources. That sounds like another threat, Mr. Everett. Pope's voice floated from the corner, mild as milk. Want me to quote you on that? Everett gathered his papers, stood. This offer will not be extended again. Good, Josie said. The door's behind you. He left. The room went quiet. Henry was pale, gripping the table edge with white-knuckled hands. $5,000. Safety. His daughter's future secured. And they'd just thrown it in the dirt. Josie, Henry said softly, that was a lot of money. That was a lot of silence, Papa. There's a difference. Eli took her hand under the table. Her fingers were ice cold, but her grip was iron. She was shaking, just barely, a tremor running through her that only Eli could feel because he was touching her. She'd just turned down enough money to change her life because 12 strangers she'd never met deserved better than being forgotten. Eli had never loved anyone in his life. He'd made sure of that, built walls specifically to prevent it, spent 13 years perfecting the art of not caring. But sitting there, holding Josie Callaway's trembling hand, after she'd stared down a corporate lawyer and chosen principle over safety, Eli knew with the certainty of a man watching the sunrise that he loved this woman. Completely, irreversibly. In the way his father had loved his mother. The all-consuming, world-ending, life-defining way that he'd spent half his existence running from. And it didn't feel like destruction. It felt like waking up. The next 72 hours were the longest of Eli's life. Waiting. Watching. Every rider on the road could be Boone's men. Every sound at night could be the beginning of the retaliation Everett had promised. Eli posted men on watch in shifts, kept rifles loaded, kept Josie close, even when she told him she didn't need a bodyguard. I'm not guarding you, Eli said. I'm guarding me. If something happens to you, I'm done. You understand that? I'm done. Josie looked at him for a long moment. That's the most terrifying thing anyone's ever said to me. It's the most honest thing I've ever said to anyone. On the fourth morning, Otis rode in from Copper Hill at a gallop, which Otis never did, because Otis believed that running a horse was an admission that you'd failed to plan properly. He swung down in the yard and strode toward Eli with a telegram in his hand, and something on his face that Eli had never seen there before. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Read it, Otis said. Eli took the telegram, read it once, read it twice, read it a third time because his eyes weren't working right. They kept blurring, and he had to blink hard to clear them. Silverstone Mining Corporation had officially removed Garrett Boone from his position as territorial superintendent, pending internal investigation. The board of directors, facing mounting negative publicity and the threat of territorial investigation, had decided to sacrifice Boone to save the company. They'd released a statement claiming Boone had been operating without proper oversight, and that any questionable tactics were his personal decisions rather than corporate policy. They'd thrown him to the wolves. Josie read the telegram over Eli's shoulder. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. Is it real? It's real, Otis said. Pope confirmed it through 3 different sources. Boone's been cut loose. No more corporate lawyers, no more company money backing his threats. He's just a man now. A rich man, still dangerous, but a man without an army. Papa, Josie turned to Henry, who was standing in the cookhouse doorway. Papa, it's over. He's been removed. Henry read the telegram with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. When he finished, he sat down on the cookhouse steps and cried, Not quietly, not with dignity. He cried the way a man cries when a weight he's been carrying for years is suddenly lifted, and his body doesn't know what to do with the absence of it. Josie sat beside him and held him while he wept. Eli stood a few feet away, giving them space, feeling his own eyes burn in a way he hadn't allowed since he was 14 years old, kneeling in mud beside a river. "Boss." Otis stood next to him, voice low. "There's more. Pope says the territorial investigation has already turned up evidence of multiple violations. Criminal charges likely against several Silverstone employees. And Boone—" Otis paused. "Boone left the territory yesterday, heading east. Running." Garrett Boone, who'd terrorized an entire territory, who'd destroyed businesses and lives and futures without breaking a sweat, who'd looked Josie in the eye and told her she belonged to him. Garrett Boone was running. Eli let that sink in. Let it settle. Let himself feel, for the first time and longer than he could remember, the sensation of a fight being over. Not just paused, not just delayed. Over. "Ot," Eli said. "Yeah, boss? I'm going to go do something now that I need you to never mention to anyone." Otis raised an eyebrow. Eli walked over to Josie and Henry, sat down on the steps beside them, put his arm around Josie's shoulders, and let 2 tears fall. Just 2. Small ones. Over before they started. But Josie saw them, reached up and caught one with her thumb, looked at him with those amber eyes that had seen through him from the first second they'd met. "Elijah Harlan," she whispered. "Are you crying?" "No." "Looks like crying." "It's dust." "There's no dust. You're on wooden steps." "Then it's allergies." Josie laughed, really laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and means the world isn't ending after all. And she leaned into him and pressed her face against his neck and laughed until she cried and cried until she laughed. And Eli held her through all of it. This woman who'd walked into his cookhouse and burned his fortress to the ground and built something better in its place. Henry wiped his face and looked at the two of them with an expression that mixed exhaustion and relief and the dawning realization that his daughter had fallen in love with a cowboy who didn't know how to hang curtains. "Mr. Harlan," Henry said. "Sir, you turned down $5,000 for my daughter." "I turned down $5,000 for what was right. Your daughter was a bonus." Henry stared at him. Then he laughed, a rusty, creaking sound, like a door opening that had been shut too long. "I think I like you."
"Don't push it," Eli said. But he was almost smiling, and Josie was still pressed against his side, and the telegram was still in his hand, and somewhere east of here, Garrett Boone was running from the wreckage of his own cruelty. Tommy Dawson appeared in the yard, saw the 3 of them sitting on the cookhouse steps, saw Josie's tear-streaked face and Eli's arm around her, and Henry's rusty smile. "Did something good happen?" "Something good happened," Otis said from behind him. "Does this mean Miss Josie's staying?" Eli looked down at the woman in his arms. Josie looked up at him. And in the space between their faces, close enough to share breath, a question passed that didn't need words, and an answer came back that didn't need them either. "Yeah, Tommy," Eli said. "She's staying." Tommy whooped loud enough to spook the horses. The crew came running from every direction, and within 5 minutes, the whole story was out, and 8 cowboys were celebrating in the yard like they'd won a war. Which, in a way, they had. Otis stood apart from the celebration, watching with that quiet satisfaction of a man who'd seen the outcome before anyone else. Eli caught his eye across the yard. "Don't say it, Ot." "Say what, boss?" "Whatever you're thinking."
Otis grinned. I was just thinking, it's a fine day for curtains. Eli shook his head. But he was smiling, really smiling. The kind of smile that changes a face, because it comes from a place that hasn't been used in so long it almost forgot how. And sitting on those cookhouse steps, with Josie's hand in his, and his crew celebrating around him, and the sun warming the land he'd bled for, Eli Harlan felt something he hadn't felt since he was 11 years old, sitting in his mother's kitchen, with yellow curtains catching the light. He felt home. 3 weeks after Garrett Boone fled Montana Territory, Eli Harlan did something he'd never done in his entire adult life. He walked into the general store in Copper Hill and bought curtains. Yellow ones. The woman behind the counter, Mrs. Pemberton, looked at him like he'd asked for a live alligator. Curtains, she repeated. Yellow ones, Eli said again. For windows. I know what curtains are for, Mr. Harlan. I'm just surprised you do. Eli paid and left before she could ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. He rode home with the curtains rolled up in his saddlebag, feeling ridiculous and terrified and alive in a way that made his hands shake on the reins. Josie was in the cookhouse when he got back. She was always in the cookhouse. It was her kingdom, her territory, the place where she'd built something out of flour and fire and sheer stubborn will. Eli walked past the window and she looked up, saw the fabric under his arm, and went very still. He didn't stop. Didn't explain, just went into his house, their house eventually, if he could find the nerve to ask, and hung those curtains himself. It took him 40 minutes because he'd never hung curtains in his life, and he bent 3 nails and hit his thumb twice, and swore loud enough that Otis came over from the bunkhouse to make sure nobody was dying. What in the name of... Otis stopped in the doorway, looked at the curtains, looked at Eli, looked at the curtains again. Not a word, Ot. Wouldn't dream of it, boss. Otis's voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. He turned and walked away without saying anything else, and Eli loved him for it. When the curtains were hung, crooked, imperfect, absolutely the most beautiful things Eli had ever put on a wall, he stood back and looked at them. Yellow fabric and clean windows, catching the afternoon light, turning the room from a box into something his mother would have recognized. A home. Not yet, but the beginning of one. They're crooked. Eli turned. Josie stood in the doorway, arms crossed, studying the curtains with the same critical eye she used to assess undercooked biscuits. I know they're crooked. The left one's about 2 inches lower than the right. I know. And you've used horseshoe nails, which are going to rust. Josie, they're perfect. Her voice cracked on the word. She crossed the room in 4 steps and threw her arms around him. And Eli caught her and held on, his face buried in her hair, breathing in the scent of bread and cinnamon, and the woman who'd taught him that walls were meant to have windows, and windows were meant to have curtains, and a man who lived without them wasn't really living at all. I love you, Eli said. The words came out raw and clumsy, like a language he'd never spoken, trying to form sounds his mouth didn't know how to make. He'd never said those words to anyone, not once in 27 years. They felt foreign and terrifying and absolutely, unquestionably true. Josie pulled back to look at him. Her amber eyes were full of tears and light. Say it again. I love you. One more time, so I know you mean it. Josephine Callaway, I love you. I have loved you since you handed me a bowl of stew and told me where you keep your shotgun. I will love you until they put me in the ground, and probably after that too, because I reckon even death can't fix what you've done to me. Josie laughed through her tears. That's the worst declaration of love I've ever heard. It's the only one I've got. Then I'll take it. She kissed him, not gentle, not careful. She kissed him like a woman who'd been waiting for a man to stop being afraid. And Eli kissed her back, like a man who'd finally figured out what he'd been afraid of losing and decided it was worth every risk he'd ever imagined. When they broke apart, breathless, foreheads touching, Eli said, "I need to talk to your father."
I know. He's going to make this difficult. He's going to cry, Eli. My father cries at everything now. He cried when the territorial investigator told him his building was in compliance. He cried when Sally Patterson baked him a cake. He's going to absolutely fall apart. Great. Looking forward to it. Josie laughed again, and Eli decided right then that he would spend the rest of his life trying to make that sound happen as often as possible. He rode to Copper Hill the next morning, found Henry in the boarding house kitchen, the same kitchen where Eli had first tasted Josie's stew and felt his carefully constructed world start to come apart at the seams. Henry was washing dishes, humming something off-key, looking 10 years younger than he had 3 weeks ago. "Mr. Callaway." Henry turned, read Eli's face, set down the dish he was holding very carefully, like a man who knows the next few minutes are going to change everything. "Mr. Harlan." "I'd like to marry your daughter, sir." Henry stared at him. Eli stood there, hat in his hands, feeling like he was 14 again, and the world was too big and he was too small, and everything that mattered was balanced on the next words someone else decided to say. "Sit down," Henry said. Eli sat. Henry poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of Eli, sat across from him, took a sip, took another, set the cup down. "You turned down $5,000, Henry said. "Yes, sir." "You could have taken that money and walked away clean. Could have signed those papers, retracted everything, and Boone would have left you alone. You'd have your ranch, your water rights, your crew, everything you'd spent years building, safe and secure." "Yes, sir." "But you didn't." "No, sir. Because of my daughter." Eli thought about that. Thought about it honestly, the way Josie had taught him to be honest, stripping away the comfortable lies to get at the hard truth underneath. Partly, but also because of Bill Crawford and Martha Henderson and every other person on that list who deserved better than being forgotten. And because of you, sir. You were scared, and that's nothing to be ashamed of, because Boone was terrifying, and the system was rigged, and you were alone. But you still came to the ranch when Otis asked. You still wrote down every name and every date. You still fought, even when you were sure you'd lose. Henry's eyes had gone bright. Josie did the fighting. I just held her coat. Holding coats is fighting, Mr. Callaway. I've learned that recently. Henry was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Eli started to think he was going to say no, that he'd decide Eli wasn't good enough, wasn't stable enough, wasn't whole enough for a woman like Josie. And maybe he'd be right. Eli wasn't whole. He was cracked and scarred and held together with stubbornness and fear and the recent discovery that loving someone didn't have to destroy you. My wife, Henry said slowly, was the strongest person I ever knew. She ran this boarding house, raised our daughter, kept this whole family going while I fumbled around trying to figure out how to be useful. When she died, I thought I'd never meet anyone that strong again. He looked at Eli. Then my daughter grew up, and then my daughter brought home a cowboy who doesn't know how to hang curtains, but figured out how to fight a mining company. The curtains are crooked. I heard. Henry almost smiled. Mr. Harlan, my daughter doesn't need my permission to marry anyone. She's the most stubborn, independent, terrifyingly capable woman I've ever known. And if she wants to marry you, she'll marry you whether I approve or not. But since you're asking, he reached across the table and gripped Eli's hand. Yes, you have my blessing.
Take care of her. I will. And let her take care of you. That's the part most men get wrong. They think love is about protecting. It's not.
It's about letting someone in close enough to see the worst of you and trusting them to stay anyway. Eli's throat was tight. She's already seen the worst of me. And she's still here, Henry squeezed his hand. That ought to tell you something. Eli bought the ring in Copper Hill from a silversmith who worked out of a shop barely bigger than a closet. Simple gold band with a small amber stone set in the center, the color of Josie's eyes when the light hit them right. It cost him 2 months' wages, and he would have paid 10 times that without blinking. He waited for Sunday, not because Sunday was special, but because Sunday was when the crew rode into town and the ranch went quiet, and Eli wanted quiet for this. He wanted it to be just them, just their voices, just the truth they'd been building toward since the first morning she'd handed him stew and told him she didn't scare easy. He found her by Blackstone Creek. She'd been walking there more often lately, following the water north along the bank, and Eli knew why without asking. The creek was what had started all of it, the reason Boone came after him, the reason the fight began, the reason they'd been pushed together hard enough to crack through each other's armor. The creek was where their story lived. Josie was sitting on the bank under the old cottonwood tree, the one that had shifted sides when the creek changed course. Her boots were off, her feet in the cold water, her hair down in those copper-brown waves that Eli could have watched for the rest of his life without getting bored. "You followed me," she said without turning. "I did." "You're not subtle, Elijah. I heard your boots from 50 yards. Eli sat down beside her. The creek ran past them, cold and clear, the sound of it filling the spaces between words. He reached into his pocket and felt the ring there, small and warm, the most important thing he'd ever held. "Josie. I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him, those amber eyes, steady and unafraid, the same eyes that had sized him up in her mother's kitchen and found him wanting, the same eyes that had seen through every wall he'd built and decided to walk through anyway. 6 months ago, Eli said, I was a man living in a house without curtains. I had land, cattle, water, a crew that worked hard, and not one single reason to come home at the end of the day that wasn't about survival. I'd built everything I had by making sure I never needed anyone, never depended on anyone, never cared about anyone enough to be hurt when they left. "Eli, let me finish, please." His voice cracked, and he didn't try to hide it. "You walked into my cookhouse, and you made me want things I'd spent half my life swearing off. You made me want mornings with someone, evenings with someone. You made me want to argue about crooked curtains and eat dinner at the same table every night and know that when I wake up at 3 in the morning from a bad dream, there's someone next to me who knows my name." Josie's eyes were bright now, tears catching the light. "We fought a man who wanted to destroy us," Eli continued. "We stood up when everyone said we'd get knocked down. We turned down money and safety and the easy way out, because you taught me that some things matter more than being comfortable. You taught me that, Josie. You taught a man who'd forgotten how to feel, that feeling was the whole point." He pulled the ring from his pocket, held it up between them. The amber stone caught a shaft of sunlight and threw warm sparks. "I don't have $5,000. I've got 1,800 acres and a creek that doesn't stay where it's supposed to, and 8 cowboys who eat too much, and a house with crooked curtains. I've got scars and fears and a dead man's grief that I'm still learning how to put down. But I've got a heart that works again because you fixed it, and I want to give it to you, if you'll have it." Josie was crying, not the quiet, dignified kind, the messy, real kind,
with tears running down her cheeks and her nose going red and her breath hitching in a way that made her whole body shake. "Josephine Callaway, will you marry me?" "Yes." The word came out broken and beautiful and immediate. No hesitation, no pause. Just yes. Like she'd been carrying the answer in her chest for weeks and was finally allowed to let it out. "Yes, Eli. Yes. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, which seemed impossible, but also exactly right. Because nothing about Josie Callaway had ever been wrong for him. Not from the first second she turned around in that kitchen and looked at him like she could see everything he was trying to hide. She grabbed his face in both hands and kissed him hard. He tasted salt from her tears and sweetness underneath, and he held onto her like a man who'd finally found the shore after drowning for 13 years. "I love you," Josie said against his mouth. "I love you and your crooked curtains and your empty house that won't be empty anymore. I love your stubbornness and your fear, and the way you pretend you're not crying when you're absolutely crying." "I'm not crying." "Eli, your face is wet." "It's the creek." "We're 10 feet from the creek." "Spray." Josie laughed and cried at the same time and pulled him closer, and they sat there on the bank of Blackstone Creek, holding onto each other, while the water ran past them steady and sure, heading where it always headed, finding its own course, regardless of what the map said, or the lawyers argued, or the powerful men demanded. They were married 6 weeks later under an arbor that Tommy Dawson built, and Otis decorated with wildflowers he'd ridden 3 hours to find. Half of Copper Hill turned out, including Bill Crawford and Martha Henderson, and 4 other people from Henry's list, who'd come to see the couple that had broken Garrett Boone's grip on the territory. Henry walked Josie down the makeshift aisle. He was crying before they reached the second row, which Josie had predicted and Eli had been warned about. Otis stood as Eli's best man, wearing a clean shirt that Josie had pressed for him, and an expression of such deep, quiet joy that Eli had to look away to keep his composure. Marcus Pope came from Denver to cover it. His article ran the following week, with the headline Eli would frame and hang in the kitchen next to the crooked curtains. The rancher and the cook who took on a mining empire and won each other. Josie moved into the ranch house the day after the wedding. She brought plants and books and a set of kitchen towels embroidered with tiny flowers, and a cast-iron skillet that she said had been her mother's and was therefore not negotiable in terms of kitchen placement. Eli gave her every inch of space she wanted and found that his house, their house, transformed overnight from a place where he slept into a place where he lived. The crew adjusted without missing a beat. If anything, morale went from high to astronomical. Josie still cooked every meal, still ran the kitchen with that efficient grace that had captivated Eli from the first morning. But now she did it as the boss's wife, which gave her opinions on ranch operations a weight that she wielded with terrifying competence. "She's running this place," Hank Bishop told Eli one evening. "You know that, right?" "I know." "You okay with it?" "Hank, she runs it better than I do. I'm just smart enough to get out of the way." Otis's daughter Ruth came from Kansas that autumn. Josie had written to her, without telling Otis, and arranged the visit, paying for the stage ticket out of her own savings. When Ruth stepped off the stage in Copper Hill, 16 years old, and looking so much like her mother that Otis stopped breathing, the big man fell to his knees right there in the street and held his daughter and wept in a way that made every person watching understand that some distances are measured in years, not miles. Ruth stayed through winter, then through spring. Then she just stayed, taking a room at Henry's boarding house and helping Sally Patterson with the guests, and riding out to the ranch on weekends to eat Josie's cooking and listen to her father laugh in ways she'd never heard before. "You did that," Eli told Josie one night, lying in their bed in their house with their curtains glowing gold in the lamplight. Otis and Ruth, you brought them back together. I wrote a letter. Ruth did the brave part. You write a lot of letters.
Someone has to.
You'd communicate entirely in grunts if I let you. Eli pulled her closer. I love you. Grunt. That's not a grunt. Those are words. 3 words. Your entire emotional vocabulary. I've also learned please and thank you, and those biscuits are incredible. Progress. Josie nestled against him. Give it another 10 years, you might manage a full paragraph. Spring came early that year. The snow melted fast, feeding Blackstone Creek until it ran high and loud, and the grass came up green across 1,800 acres that felt different now. Not just land, not just property. Something more. Something that had people in it who mattered to each other, who'd fought for each other, who'd chosen to stay not because they had nowhere else to go, but because this was where they wanted to be. On a morning in late April, Eli stood on his porch with coffee in one hand and his other arm around Josie's waist.
She was leaning against him, warm and real and present in a way that still made his chest ache with gratitude. Behind them, yellow curtains moved in the breeze through an open window.
What are you thinking? Josie asked. That I almost missed this. All of it. Almost spent my whole life in an empty house because I was too scared to let someone in. But you didn't. Because you wouldn't let me. Eli kissed her temple. You walked into my cookhouse and refused to let me be alone. Stubborn woman. Someone had to be. You certainly weren't going to figure it out by yourself. Eli laughed. A real one. The kind that came from somewhere deep and warm and healed. Josie's hand moved to rest on her stomach, where the smallest change had started making itself known in the past few weeks. A tenderness, a fullness, a secret she'd been carrying until she was sure enough to share. Eli? Yeah? I have something to tell you. She took his hand and placed it on her belly, held it there,
Looked up at him with those amber eyes that had never once, not from the very first moment, looked away from the truth. Eli understood. The knowledge hit him like sunrise, sudden, total, warming everything it touched. His hand pressed flat against her, feeling nothing yet, but knowing everything. And something in his chest that had been cracked and mended and cracked again, finally sealed over. Not with walls this time, with something stronger. Are you scared? Josie asked, watching his face. Terrified. Good, she smiled. Terrified is how you do your best work. Eli looked out at his land, at the ranch they'd built together, at Otis checking fence lines in the distance, at Tommy Dawson chasing a barn cat across the yard, at the cookhouse where it had all started with a bowl of stew and a woman who wouldn't look away. He thought about his mother's yellow curtains. He thought about his father kneeling by a river. He thought about a 14-year-old boy who'd made a promise to never let anyone close enough to matter. And the 27-year-old man who'd broken that promise because a cook with steady hands and fierce eyes had shown him that the bravest thing a man can do isn't building walls. It's tearing them down. I want to build something that lasts, Eli said. Not just a ranch, not just a name. A family, here, on this land. I want our kids to know what it means to fight for what matters, and to love people, even when it's terrifying. I want them to know that their father was a coward who learned to be brave because their mother wouldn't let him be anything less. You were never a coward, Eli. I was, but I'm not anymore. He pulled her close. You fixed that. I didn't fix you. Josie's voice was fierce and tender all at once. You were never broken. You were just locked. All I did was knock. Eli Harlan held his wife on the porch of the home they'd built together, with yellow curtains in the windows, and a child growing in her belly, and a crew of good men working land that mattered. And he understood something his father never had. Love wasn't a liability. Love wasn't the thing that destroyed you. Love was the only thing strong enough to save a man from himself. He'd spent 13 years building walls to keep the world out. It took one woman 6 months to show him that the world he was keeping out was the only one worth living in. And standing there with Josie's heartbeat against his chest, and the future stretching out before them, wide and bright and terrifying and beautiful, Eli Harlan knew the one thing he'd been too afraid to believe for most of his life. He was home. He was whole. And he was never going to be alone again.